Well, today we have a guest to join us on A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gornoski, and I'm here with Clint Russell, who's the host of the Liberty Lockdown podcast. And apparently now he's turned into a politician. And
Ugh.
you know how those politicians are. So we're going to see what Clint Russell has up his sleeve as a politician. How you doing, Clint?
Well, as you can tell by my attire, I'm not changing anything about myself. So, I may be running for office, but I am. I still assure you, I will be telling the truth, even if it's not to my benefit.
Have you been taking lobbyist money?
Not a penny. No.
You're also
all, all out of my own pocket, unfortunately.
the last since we last talked. I don't think we talked about this. You're the co-host of the Best Political Show, right? What? Tell us a little bit about that show. I'm not. That's
Yeah.
something new for me.
Yeah. Luke Radowski, he's been basically like a guerrilla reporter for the past 20 years, covering all the stuff that you're not supposed to. He co-hosted Timcast IRL for about a year. About a year ago, he moved to Miami, and I was in talks to work with Tim Pool over at Timcast, and we that didn't work out. But I realized that Luke lived very near to me, so I hit him up and I was like, "Hey, if you want to start a show, let me know." And he's like, "Oh, dude, I'm actually starting a show like next month, and I would love to have you as a co-host." So we've been doing that for the past 4 months or so. We signed an exclusive deal with Rumble, and it's been great.
So what? How does that like? What do you guys focus on that show? How is that? Is it a little bit different from the Liberty Lockdown, or how do you see it?
Yeah, yeah, we have a different guest every night. We go live 3 days a week, usually 6 to 8 Eastern. Kind of like a lead-in Timcast IRL to Timcast IRL, but the second hour of our show is exclusively on Rumble, so it's totally uncensored. We get to cover all the things that you can't cover on YouTube. So I think that's the niche that we're in, is that we're able to talk more openly and honestly about more controversial topics, and do so in a more irreverent, profane way, at least in the second hour when we're on
Right.
Rumble.
You guys are over in Miami. Are you doing that format that I see all these podcasts doing, where they bring in all these Instagram girls to sit in the
No.
audience and say, "So, tell us about arithmetic. Can you spell? That whole thing."
Yeah. Can you tell us how you would bring peace to the Middle East in between your Instagram reels?
Yeah.
No, we're not doing that. Certainly, we've had some ladies as guests, but it's not at all the whatever podcast style where we're just trying to dunk on thoughts or whatever.
Now I remember we talked in the past years ago about you coming to our neck of the woods here in Florida. So you're here now. And how many years have you been here altogether? What do you think?
Yeah, I've been here about 2 years now. I mean, it's a beautiful state. I'm from San Diego, so I was seeking comparable weather. I don't know if it's as perfect as San Diego, but it's pretty darn good. So I'm happy with that. But really, I don't spend much time, going out on the town or things like that. I am 50 plus minimum hours per week that I'm either reading, researching on Twitter, doing live streams, doing Liberty Lockdown, doing Tower Gang, doing the Best Political Show. I just work a ton.
You have a
So
quill
I'm
pen and you're just in the feverishly writing with the candlelight at night, right here by this little futuristic modern window here, and you're just scribbling away like a
no,
mad scientist in the middle of the night while Miami
no, no, no,
rages.
yeah, no quill, but certainly the spirit of our founders resides somewhere within me. So I certainly try and channel them from time to time.
Now, what have you been researching the most lately? You said you've been spending a lot of time researching. What topics are you researching? I know your show, kind of the lockdown concept, came around during the lockdowns, and you were hitting the ground running on that. And our show, A Neighbor's Choice, we were early hitting that hard on. I remember March 2020. My co-host and I were hitting that hard. I remember St. Patrick's Day, right when this whole thing started. We said, I don't know about this thing. You're going to want to try generic drugs. And we were pushing azithromycin because we had, seen it work in other similar situations. And we were familiar with the scientific literature. And of course, a lot of people have come around to that position after it's been safe. Even so-called hardcore libertarians and those folks, some of them played it very safe about getting into the weeds of the politics and the science malfeasance around COVID. But now now that it's all passed and the censorship regime around that has been loosened, a lot of folks have come along to speak very loudly about it. But I know that you were another voice who was pretty early on talking about that. What have you been
Very.
researching now lately? More of the COVID stuff, or have you shifted to some other topics?
Oh no, I cover everything. Yeah, I started my show first week of May 2020. So I was, and only reason I didn't start sooner is because I was packing up everything and trying to prepare myself to get the hell out of California. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was definitely early, and actually a large part of the reason I started my show is because I was disappointed with many in the libertarian world that were not speaking out when it was most important that they do so, because I felt that it was the greatest right infringement in my lifetime, and I still believe that. So it was a catastrophe. But in terms of latest coverage, I spent a lot of time diving into ESG and DEI to explain to my audience what was going on with that. I began that process probably 2 years ago. I made that a big focal point of my show. My background is in finance, so I felt like I had something unique to bring.
Yeah.
I also talk a lot about and research, commercial real estate, which I believe is in one of the most historic bubbles of all time. Residential real estate, which is in less of a bubble, just simply because the inventory is so low and the immigration crisis is kind of offsetting what would otherwise be deflationary pressures. Especially with the Fed hiking interest rates as rapidly as they did over the past year and a half. So I cover that a lot. And then lately I've been digging deep. I had Chris Martenson on to talk about his time in the Darien Gap, talking about the immigration and whether or not this is an organic phenomenon, or in fact, there's some sort of plan that's happening. My assessment being that it's a United Nations Agenda 2030 type of deal. And most recently, I've been diving deep on the Alexei Navalny death in prison 2 days ago, and the narrative that has been set in the past to make the American left care about that, what they intend to do with that narrative and that propaganda and that political and popular will amongst Democrat voters. And then today, episodes that's coming out later tonight, I break down how the Hillary Clintons of the world are capitalizing on that narrative that they've set. So I cover a lot.
Well, let's talk on the Navalny story. That's a fresh story. It's just happening, and the fallout from that's happening. What is your take on that? I mean, it's just strange how I was. There was this. It's just strange the timing of that. It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
And you have to say, well, how did that happen? Have you looked at the details of that? Is there anything that sticks out to you there?
Yeah, I mean, let me start by saying I don't know. I don't know if Putin's responsible for the death of Navalny. I don't think anybody knows. But what I find fascinating is that the political establishment, from Cheney's daughter to Nikki Haley to Hillary Clinton to Huma Abedin to the Lindsey Graham. I mean, the list of political establishment elites, bipartisan, that are portraying this. Ted Lieu congressman came out today, said the same thing. They're all the same narrative. Putin is responsible for killing Navalny. They're saying it overtly, despite the fact they could come to no conclusion after years with Epstein. He just, he hung himself. That's end of that. The surveillance footage was off. Sure, the guards were asleep. Sure, he was in a federal prison in America, and that probably shouldn't happen. Sure, he had compromise on the entire American political elite and also many foreign elite. But, nothing to see here. But within 24 hours, and actually less than that for many of these people, they already knew for a fact that Putin was responsible for killing Navalny. Now, the reports are that he had a heart attack in prison. I am not going to pretend to know for a fact that Putin did or did not. But I think that the important thing to realize is that the American left in particular has been propagandized heavily to believe that Alexei Navalny is someone he is not. They have been told that he is this really heroic opposition leader to this tyrant fascist Vladimir Putin. In reality, what Navalny represented was a very nativistic approach. He was very antagonistic towards Muslims in particular, but immigration more broadly. He was very much not the progressive hero that you might get the feeling that that's their sentiment about this guy. But if you actually look what he was campaigning on, it's not at all the case. There's also footage that... Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say there was also footage that came out yesterday from a few years ago where Navalny's in this cafe. I think it's in England. I'm not sure. And he's sitting down with an MI6 agent, and they're talking about how if he were to get funded to the tune of $10 or $20 million annually, that could really change his hopes for political success in Russia. It looks to me quite clearly like Navalny was a MI6 CIA backed asset that was basically being uplifted in Russia, in the Russian political system, to try and topple and ultimately color revolution, remove Putin from power. I don't have any affinity for Putin. Let me make that very clear. But I also think that the portrayal of him as being this heroic freedom fighter and ultimately some political leader that should be looked up to by the left, despite the fact that his rhetoric is very counter to what they espouse, at least domestically. I think it's fascinating. I think that it demonstrates that there has been a multi-year propaganda campaign. Now, let me add one other very important factor. There has been a defense bill that has been attempted to be passed multiple times over the past month. It was all three, the border bill for America, as well as additional funding for Israel and Ukraine. That died in the House. Then they repackaged it. They tried to do a standalone bill for Israel only. That died in the House. And now they're repackaging it, doing defense for Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine to the tune of $95 billion, with zero for the border, the thing that most Americans are actually concerned about. But they want to send 100 billion more of your dollars, printed dollars, really, to these other proxy wars all over the world. And it is once again struggling to pass. So I think that the timing is extraordinarily interesting, in that Navalny passing in prison and all of these political elite that come out and they tweet and they go on the media and they're just talking, we have to pass this defense bill. Look at who Putin is. He's responsible for killing his top political opponent. This man's a tyrant. It to me screams op. So that's my read.
And what was his? Do you know what his position? I didn't know what his position is on the Ukraine war. Did he have any positions on that?
Navalny?
Yeah.
I actually don't know his position on that. I would imagine that he would be in opposition to it, simply because I think he was the bagman for Western. I
just wonder how subtle an op that would have been. Sometimes they might say, yeah, don't be too antagonistic on the war because we want you to get in there. We don't want you to be too obvious that you're an ally of the West. So who knows?
Yeah. I'll look that up as soon as we're done here, because that will be a big tell.
Yeah. But the question is, why would Putin have killed him right now when, unless maybe, I'm just thinking in their mind, maybe they felt like Putin was too soft on the West and in terms of the Russian perspective with Tucker in that interview. You know what I mean? Like maybe he was too easy and he needed to show that he's still a tough guy too. He's not just a nice conversationalist like he tried to demonstrate in that interview. You know what I'm saying? So
right,
maybe that.
But why do that though with the $95 billion spending bill, $60 billion of which goes to Ukraine directly, which is already running out of men and ammunition? Yeah. Why would you possibly do that now to help get this defense spending bill over the line? It just doesn't make any sense. The timing, more than anything. I'm not even saying that it doesn't make sense that he might, flex his tyrant muscle and take out his political opposition violently like that. That's certainly a possibility. But the timing of it just screams he's not the guy. He's not responsible. That's my opinion.
So then what has there been any plausible theory or evidence as to how somebody outside of Russia's elites would have orchestrated the timing of this death and everything?
I mean, it's pretty easy. He's in a Russian prison in Siberia. I'm sure they could pay off some other prisoner to give him poison or something like that. I always
say it's not, you could just know a guy that knows a guy that knows a guy that knows the lunch lady,
Yeah. It's not like Russia isn't corrupt. So I'm certain that you could hire some criminal in prison to, or a guard to put something in his food, or it was natural and he had a heart attack. It's anything's possible, but it's to assume that it's some KGB Putin op and to dismiss the concept that it might be either Mossad, MI6, CIA, Ukrainian special forces. I don't know. There's a lot of entities that can use this as a political football.
And they certainly needed to have something to change the narrative on that Tucker interview, because that gave a window to hundreds of millions of people, apparently, to a side of the debate of the war that they have never seen before. Perhaps they saw a clip, and they got a little bit of a different angle into the motivations there instead of just an attempt to take over Europe. It would certainly help to change the narrative because if anything, Tucker Tucker's interview showed a side of the conversation that led one to believe that Putin was willing to negotiate and compromise. I mean, that was kind of the takeaway point. He said, "Are you willing to negotiate? Are you willing to compromise? Are you willing to say NATO won?" And and Putin seemed to say, "Well, whatever, we're open to whatever, kind of." And that narrative needed to be shut down to get the kind of low info crowd that their baseline of support is on point with, to kind of say, okay, oh my goodness, Tucker's a liar. This interview is a total fraud. He is completely unreasonable, and he's willing to murder his opponents in cold blood.
Exactly. I mean, I had Dave Smith on my show the night of the Tucker Putin interview, and it's so obvious if you watch that full 2-hour interview. I mean, even if you skip the half an hour history lesson, Russian history lesson to start it off, he doesn't come across as an irrational actor. He's very open about the dangers that would come from a direct head-to-head hot war with NATO and Russia, and he's quite clear that he wants to avoid that, and that everybody ought to want to avoid that. So yes, the timing in that regard also adds to the incentives for Western allied intelligence agencies to perhaps have done something with Navalny. Now, I'm not saying definitively that they did, but to dismiss it entirely is totally naive. You also have his wife, Navalny's wife, who was at the Munich Security Conference the day of his death and gave a speech prepared mere hours after the news dropped that her husband, the love of her life, allegedly had died in prison at the hands of Putin. And she gets up there and she smiles ever so briefly, but it's absolutely surreal to me imagining that, my wife or my husband had died in prison as a political prisoner, and I would be able to give a speech literally a few hours later and be totally okay with it. It seems as if she is perhaps being groomed to be his replacement in the political opposition camp. We'll see if I'm right about this, but I would just encourage people to think very deeply about what really happened and what the incentives are and where they're trying to lead us, because I think the answer is the same as it's been for about a decade now, that they are trying to color revolution and ultimately regime change Vladimir Putin, and up to and including the risk for a world war.
Yeah. And like the Tucker has said, and Colonel Douglas McGregor, who comes on our show often, if you take out Putin, the people that's going to replace him are going to be most likely even more hardline anti-West. So it's kind of stupid, very stupid in a lot of ways. But to even think about trying such a mess like that,
it's reckless beyond words. Yeah. I mean, I'm grateful to hear that you have Douglas McGregor on regularly, because I think he has proven himself to be one of the most shrewd and honest geopolitical analysts, given his history in the military, and I think that his record speaks for itself when he's detailing what's actually happening in the war in Ukraine versus what you're hearing in the corporate media, that Ukraine's winning and they just need a little bit more help here or there, and it's like, it's obviously not true. It hasn't been true from the beginning, and Douglas McGregor's been telling the truth about it.
If elected vice president, would you consider him as Secretary of Defense?
Yes, absolutely. I'm certainly more non-interventionist than he is, but I would absolutely, appreciate his advice in terms of, geopolitical strategy and how to safely withdraw, because I think he's in alignment with that we need to pull back and start to defend the homeland and not the rest of the world.
How much are you a pragmatist versus an absolutist about non-intervention in all of its forms and fashions? And governance.
Yeah, I'm not much of a pragmatist when it comes to non-intervention. I think that non-intervention, if you make exceptions for intervention, you end up in the trap that we're in now, where we end up intervening for everyone all the time, everywhere, despite all of the financial consequences as well as human costs, not just in America but all over the world. And I think that it has fostered a tremendous amount of animosity towards America and the American people that I would like to alleviate. I think it's heartbreaking that while the American people believe that the American empire is one predicated off of some sort of benevolent leadership, if you actually talk to the people in the Middle East, it strikes them as quite malevolent, and I agree with their impression of it, given that they've had Reaper drones hovering over their head like the sword of Damocles for 20 years straight. It's totally, all you have to do is view them as human beings to understand why they would be so angry with America and the West more broadly. And I would like to end that process.
What about the establishment perspective? Did you see Mike Benz's article, by the way? I mean, excuse me, Mike Benz's interview with Tucker Carlson?
I did. Yeah. And Luke and I had Mike Benz in studio a few weeks
ago. Tucker centric today, but it's okay because he's been doing some real heavy hitting slam dunks lately, hasn't he?
He has. We had Mike Benz in studio for the Best Political Show with Luke and I just 2 weeks ago, and he didn't let on that he was going to be on Tucker Carlson soon. So I was thrilled to watch it, and Mike has obviously done an amazing job at connecting the dots with how the government has worked with big tech to censor all of us, and I'm very appreciative of that disclosure.
No, he says that we're under military rule. Do you share that same assessment, or do you think it's a little bit different?
Yes and no. I think that the military aspect of it is just to reinforce really the unelected bureaucracy that actually runs things. And you know, obviously they still have to have the power of the state backing them. So I'm sure that they have contacts, if not a huge swath of the military that is at their disposal to carry out their intentions. But I'm not at all certain that we're like generals are actually making the call. I think that it's still the unelected bureaucracy, you know, in the deep state, as Trump would call it, that is likely calling the shots, as well as some foreign lobbies and things of that nature.
If you guys succeed in you know, being the Libertarian Party ticket, and you're running against the same deep state that Trump's running against, do you worry that you might be the difference that costs him the election?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly it would be a worse outcome to see a second Biden administration. I am very much, my eyes are wide open as to the danger of not Biden himself, but what he represents, kind of this skin suit for the establishment and the worst aspects of the establishment, the military industrial complex, big pharma, everything else. I mean, he's an absolute disaster, or his regime is disastrous. That being said, I think that Trump made enough mistakes in his first term that he needs to be held to account, and that he needs to be forced to redress the legitimate grievances of his supporters and many people that are not his supporters when it came to the COVID regime and Fauci and his willingness to arm the Ukrainians when Obama would not. He bragged openly that Obama would only give them pillows and blankets. Well, we gave them, you know, weapons and bombs. And it's like, all right, well, you own this. You own the escalation that led to Putin ultimately invading. It's certainly not only his responsibility, but he is portrayed as this total non-interventionist. That's not the case. And if Trump were a non-interventionist, if Trump hadn't put Fauci in charge, had Trump not allowed for the lockdowns, had Trump not allowed for Operation Warp Speed, there's a lot of things that he could have not done that may have kept me out of the ring, that may have allowed me to still be on the sideline. But the reality is he needs to be better. And I feel strongly that having a third party run that forces him to address these issues, I think, is to the betterment of the American electorate and to the American people.
I want to talk about the perspective that the establishment has, which is, you know, it's really nice to be, I'm going to take their perspective now. They say, it's really nice, Clint, that you have some very, principled positions, but, you know, you're not, you know, you come from a different world than they do, right? I mean, you had a different business model, and their business model is to take care of the dollar, to take care of the financial instruments that are attached to the International Monetary Fund. And we can't afford some kind of wild-eyed idealism that you might share. I mean, you're just a novice. You don't understand the way the world works. You need to stick to what you know, which is podcasting and business and property development, or whatever your background is in that, and just stay out of the big boys game. Because if you are going to mess with forces that would disrupt the dollar's hegemony and the IMF's power over the world, you're messing with something that would, you see that background there in your window there? That'd be up in flames and smoldering with chaos right now if you start getting your way of having idealism, non-intervention, people stop supporting our allies, supporting NATO, supporting Israel. The whole house of cards are going to fall. You're going to see a bunch of chaos in that building, those buildings, people falling out of windows left and right. You're going to see some people. Well, we do actually have zombies already in Miami. So, but I was going to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean they're certainly right that there would be financial consequences to some of the prescriptions that I would have to what ails us. But what I would counter with is that the flaming buildings behind me are an inevitability if we don't correct course. And my belief is that, while they can say that I'm a podcaster and that I'm not equipped for this, the reality is that I was a money manager and I have over 15 years of experience with analyzing markets and analyzing the US dollar and central banking and how it all works. And while they can portray it as being a net benefit to the American people, I believe strongly that it is a net negative, and that in fact it has expedited the offshoring of our industry. It has ultimately made us a consumer-based economy as opposed to a productive one. I think that it has also, because of central banking policy, it has taken both parents out of the home and into the workforce, which has ultimately driven up the divorce rate, which is a cultural killer.
But Clint, the American people don't own the government; the banks do. So what are you going to tell them?
That's what I'm trying to change.
But what are you going to tell them? How are you going to make a deal with them? Because they're a bunch of predatory capitalists. They're going to be vicious with you. What are you going to tell them?
I don't intend to make any deals with the bankers. They will perceive me as an enemy, and I am one, and I'm okay with that showdown. I think that they are truly predatory, not just in terms of violence, in terms of the military-industrial complex, but in terms of robbing every man, woman, and child, and those that are not even born yet, of their future. I think it's a catastrophe. It is a moral blight on civilization. And I have no fear in standing up for what I believe is just and proper, and what they have profited off of my entire life and much longer than that has to come to an end. And I think that only with that accomplished can we actually have a solid free market, capitalist model. Until then, we're dealing with the fascistic decline into madness.
But you're dealing with extremely powerful global mafia members, right? So how do you talk to mafia folks? They're not going to just they're not going to let you just come into their baby. That's their asset, not yours. We don't own that asset. That's
their perception.
Yeah.
But their fortune is made off of fraud. So if the American people understood that, I believe that they would. I mean, there's been very famous lines that if people understood central banking, there'd be a revolution overnight.
Well, how do you get single women to understand that? Because they're 99% in favor of whatever the oligarchs want. So what are you going to do politically for that issue?
Well, I may not be able to reach some of them, but I think many people languishing under inflation are starting to understand that they have been deceived. I think that it's the job of the Libertarian Party and my job specifically to explain and connect those dots as to why your financial future has been ripped out from underneath you. It's true. So if I have the truth on my side, should I fear trying to convey that message?
How are you going to do that without mansplaining, according to them?
Well, I'll mansplain. I don't really care.
But I'm getting at some real issues, which is like we have this huge problem with women voters. Women have a very difficult time with voting, especially ones that are not married, right? So that's a very difficult challenge for them because they get their maternal instinct is predated upon. They connect with the vibe of the culture more than men. And the vibe of the culture, as I call it, is Christ haunted, which means it's very sensitive to victim narratives. They're very in tune with that, and the oligarchs play on that.
Yes.
And it's very, and I'm dead serious. How in the world are we going to start to peel off all of our attention if you don't go after what you've already got in the bank. You go after what you don't have, in my opinion. And
Sure.
I think we need to be figuring out how to talk to and relate to and emote with these young women who are voting 99% for the most stupid fascist idiocy and warmongering and neocon idiocy you could ever imagine. Now, I don't know how that looks. We can come up with all kinds of ideas. We can start with picture books, whatever it takes to get young people. I'm talking middle school. You might have to go middle school, high school at this point, because time's running out, but we got to get people aware of this. And not, I don't know, Clint, if they can handle, I'm just being honest, humans in general can't handle logical arguments about this stuff at some
Yeah.
level. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to connect with them on kind of a consequentialist argumentation. Like what has been the outcome? Are you happy? Are you happy with what's going on? And if you actually correlate, you look at the people that vote in lockstep with the Biden administration or the Democrat Party, these are college graduate white women, most of which are on SSRIs. Like they're not happy people. And that may come across as judgmental or callous or uncaring. Quite the contrary. I
You said
say it.
uncaring?
It may come
Oh,
across as uncaring, but I
okay.
believe that it's the contrary, that you tell the truth to those that you love. I want to actually reach them with honesty. Like your circumstances are a product of bad ideas that you have held personally, you have been propagandized with, and that you continue to propagate. The reason that we have so few people that are getting married, household formation, having families and children, having any sort of success career wise or getting ahead in terms of saving, investing, it's inflation. It's the central bank. Like you have to recognize the origin of the evil to actually be able to fight it. And I think that that's a message that is not accusatory. It's not hateful. I'm not looking at them and saying this is all your fault. I'm saying you have been told a lie because there are propagandists that have been telling you these lies ever since you were a little kid in public school. And let's start to unwind that. Can I reach everybody? Certainly not. But can I reach millions? Yes, I think I can.
Do you think that there's any evidence that the coalition that they rely on for pushing their wars and their lockdowns and their greatest medicine of all time, that coalition is fracturing at all?
Certainly. I mean, so many people have realized that the what they were told about COVID, what they were told about lockdowns, what they were told about masking, what they were told about the vaccine, what they were told about all of it was largely, if not entirely, based off of lies. And it, like, no matter how propagandized you are, there is a huge percentage of those people that even if they won't say it publicly, they know that they were deceived,
Yeah.
and they know that they cooperated with what amounts to, if they're being honest with themselves, evil. Like what they did was evil. Telling people that still believed in bodily autonomy and their own right to make decisions, like that they were evil and expendable and second class citizens, terribly evil behavior. So I think many people don't want to reflect on that. But to your specific question as to whether or not many of them have woken up, of course.
Do you see that there is an opportunity for a third party to take to be kind of a net neutral in terms of votes taken away from either side, but to be able to shift the narrative in the direction of liberty for both sides to react to? Is
Yeah,
that what you see?
I mean, whether or not the votes can be evenly split, I don't know. I think a lot of that is going to come down to, first off, whether or not RFK Jr. is going to be in the case or in the race, because he obviously reaches a lot of the people that I'd be talking to in terms of what happened during COVID, what happened with the FDA, all those things, FBI concerns. Like he speaks to that fairly well. So I think that if the Trump campaign should be worried about anyone, it's probably an independent run from RFK Jr. because I think he'll absorb many of those dissident votes. However, he would have absorbed plenty of votes from the Democrat side if not for his take on Israel and Palestine. And I think because of that, he has lost most of the ground swell of support that he had early on from the Democrat voters because they are almost entirely in lockstep with Gaza. So I think that that's the real danger, is that RFK Jr. could be the deciding swing, not the libertarians.
What's your position on Gaza?
Well, obviously, it's very complicated, and I've deep dove it, but I am personally of the opinion that the only viable American position to hold is that aid has to be cut off to both sides. Obviously, the lion's share of it has been going to Israel for decades and decades. I believe strongly that AIPAC has way too much influence on our political establishment. I think that much of the war on terror was fought on behalf of Israel to the detriment of the American people and the American military. So I think that first and foremost, I just want to make it very clear that I am a non-interventionist and that I would absolutely be, if there is any involvement to be had from the U.S. State Department, it ought to be compelling both sides to meet at the negotiating table and to seek peace and a ceasefire. And beyond that, I would want the State Department not involved at all. If they're going to do anything beyond trying to broker a peace, they should just leave it entirely, stop funding it entirely. I'm of the belief that the Palestinian people have been aggressed upon for decades. Obviously, what happened with Hamas on October 7th was a terrible terrorist attack, and those people responsible ought to be held to account. But it doesn't change the fact that there has been aggression on both sides. There is no righteous party to stand with, and America ought to stand aside.
Are you familiar with America funding Hamas and Israel funding Hamas too for decades?
I am indeed. And this is so often the case with almost every war we end up getting into. As Dave Smith famously said, you want to see who we're fighting today, just look at who we funded yesterday. That's butchering of his quote, but that's essentially how it works, is that we fund these rebel groups in the Middle East. In fact, it's under the clean break doctrine that was Netanyahu and the neoconservatives in the 1990s. We've been doing this for decades. It has been totally counter to American interests. It has ultimately fostered some of the worst elements of Islam in terms of the most radical, the jihadists, the Wahhabist sects, and it's been done at the directives of AIPAC and of the neoconservative movement in the American political establishment, and it's been just an absolute catastrophe.
What do you do about the issue that a lot of the folks who are casual observers of politics that come out for the presidential elections, again, going back, similar to the question I asked before, they simply view any kind of conservative or libertarian critique of the way things are as a low status position to take. It's just simply low status. And that primal desire to be in higher social status relative to those around you is a more primal driving force for people's decision making, like who they're going to align with politically, than rational calculations about what may happen to the dollar if we keep this thing going,
Yeah. Well, they may. I think that's a big part of the propaganda, that there's like the Keynesian worldview, the political establishment kind of shaming of anybody that supported Trump, for instance. It's like, oh, you're blue collar hicks, you're backwards, you're flyover country. They talk about them in such a derogatory way. I'm not really interested in coming across as an elitist or an everyman or anything else. I'm just interested in telling the truth. And I think that libertarian ideas benefit everybody. Everybody aside from the political establishment and the banking elite. Like that's it benefits everybody else. So I'm fine with being relegated to second class citizenship and being described as, because I'm a populist at the end of the day. I think that my ideas benefit the vast majority of the normal powerless folks that live in America, and I'm fine just trying to reach them. I'm not here to convince CNN that I should be welcome to their cocktail parties. I wouldn't want to attend anyways, so I hope they don't invite me.
You mentioned Chris Martenson, right? He's been on the program. You said you talked to him in his recent trip to the down there where they're doing the border crossing journey.
Yeah, Darien Gap.
What's your border position as a vice presidential candidate?
Well, if you want me to answer it in libertarian theory, we can do the long explanation or the short one. The short explanation would be that I think that ultimately this is not an organic migrant issue, that this is being funded with U.S. taxpayer dollars that are being sent to the United Nations, which are then funneled into NGOs, and ultimately the 6 million or so migrants that came across over the past 12 months is not at all organic. In fact, it is essentially an orchestrated plot to try and uproot our civilization. So I'm of the belief that it ought to be left to the states to decide how they want to deal with it. And I think that the Texas National Guard ought to be given full authorization to deal with protection of their border and of their people, however they see fit. Ultimately, if that's not allowed, well, then the feds have to do it. And if the feds won't do it, well, then secession is the only answer.
What about
Obviously, I hope it's peaceful.
California, Arizona, New Mexico, blue states on the border? Do other states have some kind of right to defend themselves or right to petition the federal government to protect the border against the blue states who will keep that open border going?
Yeah, and I think it'll ultimately probably come down to the courts deciding as to who has jurisdiction and who's ultimately responsible for this. I think that, from a libertarian standpoint, I always believe that the lowest level government is the one that's most in touch with the people and can carry out their demands most readily. So that's the primary reason that I think that Texas and Governor Abbott ought to be given full leeway to deal with it however they want. However, as you said, with there being blue state leadership on some of these other border states, it's likely to create a crisis regardless, because California is still going to allow tens of thousands to enter every month, and those people will eventually migrate not through the border, but through the border of these other states. They can go through, California, through Nevada, into Texas. And I think this is why if you want to maintain the union with all 50 states, you almost certainly need to have a federal government that's going to defend the border. And if the feds won't do it, well, then this nation it's not going to last. There will be secession movements, and it's inevitable.
So, so you were in favor of a federal border enforcement, then, not just states. You ideally would like states to do it, but because it cuts both ways with the blue states on the border too, then that would default back to the border should be enforced by the federal government.
I think if there's any righteous role of a federal government in having a federal defense, that invasion ought to be in that purview, that you can absolutely stop people from coming across to the tunes of millions annually without any sort of vetting. You have to stop that. I'm sorry. It's just absolutely catastrophic, both on a cultural, economic level. It's going to be backbreaking civilizationally. So that has to stop. Now, let me clarify, though. I am very much in favor of legal immigration. And I think that legal immigration probably ought to be doubled, because as of now, we only process about 1 million visa applications and green card applications per year. That's absurd. I mean, our population is pretty much stagnant, and I think that allowing for the most intelligent all over the world to come in and get legal citizenship and become Americans is a great productive thing to do, and ultimately it benefits the American economy and ultimately the American people. But having totally unfettered 6 million annually, if you allow that to persist for a decade, you're talking about shifting the entire population of America so dramatically and so rapidly that I think that we will come, unwound. And I think that's actually the plan. So this is the primary reason that I think that the feds ought to do their job, and they ought to, regulate the border. But in the absence of that, I think that, Texas and any of the other states ought to have full legal right to do so.
You mentioned the Agenda 2030 for the United Nations. What does that specifically have to do with what you see here with a forced migration funding?
Sure. Well, your audience can just Google United Nations Immigration 2030, and in it they detail that their new plan moving forward is that they perceive this to be a global equity issue, that for too long, the imperial forces, including America and the broader West, has profited from their conquest of third world nations and stealing their resources and their people and whatever. So they want to allow for illegal immigration, allow the poorest from all over the world to go to the richest nations and to assist in that process, to not attempt to prevent it at all, which used to be kind of the standard operating procedure from most Western nations, is that we have to have some sort of regulated immigration process. Otherwise, it gets totally out of hand, and the cultural divide, exacerbates upon itself very rapidly. So that they used to have a policy of trying to slow down. Now they have a policy of funding NGOs to actually assist with this. And if you watch any of these documentaries, Muckraker, I talked to Chris Martenson, who was down there with Brett Weinstein, they confirm this to be the case, that there are major facilities that are being funded not just by NGOs and not just by U.S. tax dollars, but the United Nations, as well as China and other foreign governments that are assisting their people in getting into America. They hand out maps, they hand out cell phones, they hand out money. This is not organic. It's not. This is a plan from the World Economic Forum and the United Nations under Agenda 2030 to expedite immigration because, in my opinion, they won't say this part overtly, but I'll say it. They intend to offer amnesty, which will permanently shift the electorate, which will inculcate their power, which will essentially guarantee them electoral victories forevermore. And
So they want to
yeah,
shift it so that the electorate will decide between Nikki Haley's and Biden's for the rest of for the foreseeable future type thing. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Do you? But what if those guys that, and it's mostly men, I guess they say, are going to vote against their interests once they get here? Have they ever thought about that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility too. There's also
You know how
financial
they say,
interest.
the conservatives always say they trend very dramatically for the Democrats, but we are seeing some of that, like black vote is starting to dramatically peel away from Democrats this time, and so there's
Yes,
other radical changes. So what happens if all these guys that they're flooding in, they're not just from Latin America now, they're from other countries too. And
right.
what if they're like, nah, we don't want the globalism either. I mean, I don't know. I'm just
Well,
thinking, what do they do then? They just
I think
come
I
up with
think
another
once
pandemic.
yeah, once they're offered citizenship, they may in fact shift, as is often the case with immigrants, is that second and third generations start to be more conservative, but it's the first and second generation that are very much in alignment with whoever's talking most favorably about immigration, because they want to get to America, and once they're here, they want to be taken care of, they want to be treated nicely. Well, the Democrats, despite not giving at all a care about these people, they are the ones that offer them the most benefits and free clothes, food, housing, things like that. So if you actually look at these documentaries that I'm talking about with this migrant issue, they are asked over and over again, every step of the way, from the Darien Gap all through, from Ecuador to the Darien Gap, up into Central America, into Mexico, all the way to the border. They ask these migrants every step of the way, who are you voting for in the next election? To a man, they say Joe Biden. They all love Joe Biden. They all have been told the same narrative about Donald Trump, that he absolutely hates immigrants and he's a racist and he's a
Do
blah,
they
blah,
get
blah,
like
blah,
a
blah.
book or something when they get to these NGOs? How does this whole process start? Because they've got
Well,
people from Africa and everywhere. So, like, did they film like how that whole process starts? The NGO in your local town in Tanzania or something sends a Facebook ad saying, "Come to
that's,
America, take
yeah,
this
that's the
quiz
part.
to see if you like Biden," and then you take it, and it's like, "Oh, here's a ticket, like the Charlie Chocolate Factory." And you get what is
That's
this?
the part of the equation we don't have answers for yet, is that these documentaries for the most part have began either in Ecuador, and the reason it starts in Ecuador is because they don't require visas there, so
Mm.
people can just fly in and they can just disperse into the rest of the this hemisphere. But as far as like where they're coming from and where they're getting told that this is a good idea, I would imagine on the other side of it, there's NGOs that are telling them, if you get to America, benefits galore, you blah blah blah, everything's good, just go go go. Here's a prepaid debit card, go. But we don't know. Like there's been no documentaries made or investigative reporters that have gone to each of these disparate locations and figured
Are
out
they selling it
exactly.
like it's a fire sale? Like, come now, America's on fire, about to be out of work. Come get
Yeah,
the goodies while you can.
I
Nike stores
honestly,
looking pretty good. Won't last
yeah,
long. Please get your
yeah.
shoes. Come on down. Is that what they're doing? Is this a
I
fire sale?
I
Store
think
closing sale.
well, the store
America's
may
going
be
to turn into
closing.
the spirit of Halloween. One giant spirit of Halloween afterwards, right?
Well, that's kind of, if you go drive around any commercial real estate in any smaller towns, you'll feel like you're going past a bunch of spirit Halloween stores.
It's not even,
Um,
it'll be Christmas. It's going to be 4th of July, and they got spirit of Halloween everywhere. That's what
it,
America's
it,
turning into
that's
globally.
kind of what we are. Yeah, dollar stores and spirit Halloween stores.
You need to
But
start
yes,
campaigning at those spirit of Halloween stores and say, "Hey, let's keep this where it is. Let's not spread too much."
yeah, man. But I do think that they are being told lies. I think that many of these migrants, in fact, this is what you've seen with these rebellions. There was just Eritreans that were rebelling. I forget what nation they were in, but these are migrants that are rebelling against the domestic population, the domestic police, because I think many of them are being told lies about what they will receive when they get to these foreign lands. So the expectations are not in alignment with reality, and I think it's causing a lot of social strife. But being the
You're showing them
conspiracy-minded
photos
person
of
I am,
America from the 1990s.
yeah, right. And then they get here and they're like, "This is not what I thought.
What is this?
Everyone's
There's
got blue
trash
hair."
everywhere, just
Yeah,
like where it came from. Why do I want to come here? I thought the streets were clean in the photos I saw. Come on. They do get some nice hotels,
exactly.
though. Man, that's nice. Hilton's, right? In New York City, at least. In Chicago. Man,
Well, I've got my own theory about that. If you want to hear it too,
what's that?
I think that the particularly the blue cities where Democrat governors have been, they've overregulated the market, they've overtaxed the businesses, they had the lockdowns, which ultimately broke many of the small businesses, and they've driven out now the major retailers because they refuse to enforce property rights, and they allow for shoplifting. So you've seen commercial real estate left vacant to the tune of enormous square footage. And it's my belief that they are now using this migrant and homelessness crisis to ultimately use taxpayer funds to house these people in these commercial properties to try and artificially prop up the commercial real estate market. Wow. So we'll see if I'm right on that one, but I'm pretty sure I am.
Well, Clint, we appreciate your time, and we'll follow your campaign. When will your convention for the Libertarian Party happen?
Yeah, end of May this year. And
where is it?
It's in Washington, D.C., unfortunately. But
That's
if
where
anybody
the base
wants,
of your supporters are, I believe.
I doubt it. But if anybody wants to get involved and become a national delegate, you have to go to the Libertarian Party state convention wherever you're at. Say that you'd volunteer to be a delegate, and then you can come out the last week of May and vote for me for the vice presidential role. Clint Russell's the name, and whether I get it or I don't, I'm honestly I'm just threw my hat in the ring because I want to help the party. I think that I have the largest reach in our party of people that are willing to do it, aside from Dave Smith, who's unfortunately not able. So I'm putting my name out there, but I don't really want to do it. So if I lose, I'll kind of be grateful. But if you guys want to see me do it, if you think I would do a good job at pushing a small government, non-interventionist, truly America first type of policy, I would appreciate the support.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.